sometimes human, sometimes animal, all conceived with extraordinary imagination and a wealth of expressive detail.
Live more natural lives in their unnatural habitats.
Becoming aware of nature, of natural details, and so forth.
But whenever he can, he has to be ready to investigate the unexpected and unusual, because it may contribute to what he wants to know.
We're talking about the sorts of things that had an impact in as much as they came from one part of the world and journeyed to another and acted in the mode of impact, impulse, influence, and so on.
We want to hinder the man at the wheel, who hurls the lance of his spirit across the earth along the circle of its orbit.
I'd suggest that we should rather look for changing angles of vision.
An inventive tradition which was able to handle with considerable equanimity a long list of wonders.
Welcome back to another episode of Administrism. We're super excited for this one. This one took a lot of fucking research, and even with all of this research, we're not going to be able to cover everything. We're just going to give kind of like broad brush strokes over it because it's incredibly in-depth and rich and incredibly detailed. So I guess we'll start off by saying what we're covering, actually, which we will be covering the Australian Aboriginal Dreamtime and practices amongst many of the tribes of Australian Aboriginal or Indigenous people.
We could die twice before getting this one covered.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we could. Because, and part of the thing is like, yes, they all kind of had like this tie-in, this sort of shared mythological, like leaning, like understanding of the world, but there's very much like tribal and even individuality and nuance to everything. So like we can really only cover broad strokes with this, and a lot more research and interaction and learning needs to be done from this and with these people. But before we go on, we have the giant list of resources that we had for this one. We'll start off with Narrative as Social Practice, Anglo-Western and Australian Aboriginal Oral Traditions by Danièle M. Klapproth. Understanding Interaction in Central Australia, an ethno-methodological study of Australian Aboriginal people by Kenneth Liberman. The Songlines by Bruce Chatwin. Encountering Aborigines, a case study, Anthropology and the Australian Aboriginal by Kenelm Burridge. Remembrances of Time's East, Absolute Spatial Representations of Time in an Australian Aboriginal Community by Lyra Boroditsky and Alice Gabby. Archaeology of the Dreamtime by Josephine Flood. Dreamtime Superhighway, Sydney Basin Rock Art and Prehistoric Information Exchange by Joe McDonald. Sand Talk, How Indigenous Thinking Can Save the World by Tyson Yunkaporta. Social Anthropology and Australian Aboriginal Studies, a Contemporary Overview by Ronald M. Berndt and Robert Tonkinson. And finally, The Biggest Estate on Earth, How Aborigines Made Australia by Bill Gammage. And since we took a lot of time to read over all of these, I'm not going to be able to cite my sources exactly. However, I strongly encourage you to read these books and any other things that are put out by members of that community or people who have worked with this community or approaching an unbiased representation of it, because there has been historically a lot of bias towards these people, and it's fucking heartbreaking. Mm-hmm. But starting off, like, what with the Dreamtime, one of the things that was mentioned in the book, Narratives as Social Practice, and I think it's important to bring up, is the concept of the Dreamtime is, like, the Dreamtime is a misnomer. It's how we can kind of best understand it as Westerners or English speakers. Kind of like how we had discussed in one of the first episodes how like it's important to give these cultures agency by using their own words in order to describe their religious experts or their practices or whatnot. The Dreamtime is the best way that we've been able to kind of translate this idea, but it doesn't have to do with actual dreaming, but it also does. So it's hard to kind of put down into words, but there's also the barrier of each tribal group also having their own language. And so they all had different words and different approaches to it. For example, in this book, one of the tribes that is discussed, they use the word Yunkaporta in order to describe the dreaming, but it can also be translated into story, word, message, or like it can be added on as a prefix to actual dreaming. So there's a lot of different ways to kind of contextualize what the dreaming is. And I guess we're going to try and do our best to put into words what that is. What is your understanding of the dreaming, Pythia?
So one of the books, and it had to have been one of the ones that I finished on because I still remember this, described it as if it was a container of all things. And what we perceive as things like time and weather and the passage of it are eddies within that container. So the Dreamtime contains all that there is. And within that, it contains all that we perceive. That can include things that are tangible. It can also include the things that are intangible, but all of it is contained within this. And when you get into the more metaphysical concepts, it clicks a little bit. I've read comparisons of Genesis to this, and instead of God pulling everything out of the dirt formed itself into the ancestors of the Dreamtime. So there's this, it is a metaphysic, it is a myth history, but it's also what they're moving through mentally. So their entire worldview contains this system. The songlines are part of it too, but that's our responsibility within the Dreamtime, is to maintain the songlines, which would be the eddies that move around within it.
Yeah, that's really well put. From what I've understood, it's how everything is, like you said, kind of contextualized within what the Dreamtime is. Like, so the past is part of the Dreamtime, the present is, and so is the future. There's this very intimate tie with the land and one's environment, where one thing that I had pulled from was how they had said that since everything is kind of always simultaneously sort of occurring, anything and everything is part of the dreaming. It just needs to be sung into existence. The words need to come forth in order to bring it into existence. So everything that we perceive, all of our experiences, happen as a result of our words and our songs. And the songlines, as you had mentioned, are part of this, and those can best be described as like as you're traveling, it's a song and a kind of like it's a hymn to the land and everything that you witness, and the words and everything you're putting behind it give meaning and place to what you're seeing, but it's also describing the past of what had happened. So like when you come across a landmark or anything, you are able to describe like how that landmark came to be as a result of one of the ancestors of the Dreamtime. And because of this, you have overlapping song lines throughout the continent, as like in each direction you follow, in each direction you choose to follow, you have different song lines. And these song lines can go ahead and, as I said, describe what you're seeing, but as you had pointed out, Pythia, they have to do not only with metaphysics and like mythology, but also the songs themselves incorporate aspects of like their law or their moral teachings or how they interact with people around them. And because of this, like these stories inform how they are to behave and how they interact with everything around them. But they also contain like vital information about the geography that they're transversing, such as like where deposits of useful like ochre can be found, or where you can find underground streams or everything. And these travel across the continent, and the songlines, from what I remember, have to do with each songline tended to relate back to an individual's totem ancestor, or their dreaming, their individual. It would be referred to as an individual's dreaming. So like you would have two ancestors, two like totem animals, in which one would be like your physical, like who your father's dreaming was, that was representative of yours, or whoever your mother's was. But you would also have your spiritual dreaming as well, which was a ritualistic thing, and it was signified whenever your mother was pregnant with you, when she felt your first kick. That was when you had been gifted with your spirit dreaming, your spirit totem ancestor. And that was determined, like when she felt your first kick, as she was walking along, the tribal elders would come and determine like where you were at, or where your mother was at, where she had stepped, and what part of the songline had to do with which ancestor. And so like that was your part of your own personal dreaming. And having these personal like totemic ancestors also put restrictions on your behavior and on like social taboos, such as like if my dreaming, if I had emu dreaming, like I could not eat an emu, I could not kill an emu, because that would be cannibalism and fratricide. Like, that is my family. I can't do anything to them.
Fratricide and patricide. It's more complex than that.
Yeah.
Because not only are you emu and that animal's emu, you're both the ancestor emu. So that father spirit, so they have it was called double paternity, I think, in some of the books. Your father, who is a human, inseminated your mother, but your father, who is your totem, was the one that gave you your life, which is your first kick. And so you become that totem too. So it's very Shiva Shakti a little bit, and that you are the thing is your father, the thing is your brother, you are it. And I found that very interesting in this group.
Right. And that on top of that, like, this wasn't just shared with individual tribes. Like, there wasn't a single tribe that, if you were part of my tribe, we both shared like honey ant dreaming. No, like, we could have entirely different dreamings. It wasn't the dreamings that held us together. For the most part, from what I was able to gather, what held the tribes together were their languages. Their languages held them together, and their like social interaction. You would share dreamings with people from other tribes, other groups around you. And due to that, there wasn't much warfare over land disputes. There was no need to, because you all shared the same dreaming. You were essentially like caretakers of this land. And by taking care of this land, like, if my tribe lived in this one area, like, we were responsible for taking care of all of these landmarks as kind of like groundskeepers. And so it was our responsibility to make sure everything was taken care of and nothing bad happened. But your ancestor, your dreaming, your ancestor could be buried or like live under the earth in another tribal area. And so, like, you wouldn't try and take over where they're living, because that's where your ancestor lives anyway. So there's no need to fight over that. And like a lot of things were shared within tribal groups, and it was like the trading was based heavily on need. So if you needed something, like, yeah, I would give it to you because I have an abundance of it. And in trade for that, like, I'd take whatever you had that was kind of cool that I wanted. Like, there was no like economic push for anything. It was all based on reciprocity. However, this is not to say that there was no violence within tribal groups. That goes back to the anthropological problem of the noble savage fallacy, and like there was definitely violence in between groups, and this could happen between feuds or like blood feuds. Sometimes, like if you broke a taboo, like there's a good chance that people would fucking beat the shit out of you. Like they're human, just like we're human. They just have a different way of approaching things.
That's something I found interesting, is their approach to violence, to physical violence. I like it. And the reason I like it is they don't defer or hide it. If it's not really violence if it's out in the open. It's violence when it happens behind closed doors. So what they're pointing out, our hypocrisy, we would beat our wives and our kids and shit, but we would do it behind closed doors so no one could mediate it. Whereas they would go into the town square, we got a dispute, let's handle it. And if it got a little too violent, people would interject. And they also had post-violence resolution. So once the fight's over, there are things that the victor has to do to actually end the conflict, because the conflict didn't end at the end of the fight. It ends at the end of the resolution. And so they have an entire process to go with it. And you don't get as much of the violence that we're subjected to in the Western sphere of like random violence and stuff like that. Now, that's not to say that that doesn't happen. If you walked off of your songline, you are trespassing at that point, which, you know, getting a spear to the leg was considered the right move if you trespassed. It's just different framings of the violence. And I think it was interesting that they kept it out in the open where they could deal with it.
Yeah, and that was another thing that was brought up with like other social standards. Like if you had a complaint about someone, as you had said, like you would voice it out in the open. Like this wasn't, it was seen as of poor taste to just kind of mumble to yourself and draw back into whatever. Like even in those instances where someone would pull back and whatever, they did so in the hopes and anticipating that the rest of their people would come like, hey, why are you pulling back? We need to like figure this out. We're all in this together. But if you had a problem, like it was considered not good to talk shit about someone behind their back. Rather, you would come out into the open, and there was a custom that was brought up, and I forget which book it was in, but you would just start bitching about everything. Yeah. And you're just mad at fucking everything, and you don't call out a single person. You just kind of like they're part of the whole everything that's fucking wrong, and you're just mad. And when you did it like this, like it wasn't seen as a breaking of social conventions. It was just like, okay, this is how they're airing their frustrations and everything. When it became this like soapbox bitching at everything, and it's fucking enraging.
Yeah, and also because of the division of labor system that they use, the women are just as strong and aggressive in their pursuit of these resolutions. So it's still 50-50 who's going to win, regardless of the gender of the two people that step in.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that I would like to go back to, and like with the development of the dreaming and everything, not only did this serve like individual purposes, as we've kind of mentioned, where like it helps you navigate your surroundings and everything, and it gives you information. First of all, that information was considered privileged. And so like you would learn pieces of songlines and pieces of your dreaming upon certain times and certain ages of development. And some information was kept away from the uninitiated. Some information was kept away from like other family members or of another gender, because you had to earn the right to this knowledge. Like knowledge wasn't considered a right. It was considered something that you would earn. Like nobody's entitled to learn something. You have to earn it. That's why like part of their religious practices and everything, like you would have like your churunga, which is like the best
memory stick.
Yeah, memory stick. Like there's a like it's not just wood though. Like sometimes they were made. it's an object that helps you remember things, and like you would keep it to yourself and no one else could see it, and that was yours. But as I was saying, like the telling of or the song lines and all of the stories and everything were exactly that. They were stories too. Like they had this element of entertainment to it. And this is one thing that's been complained about with translations of Aboriginal mythology or stories or songlines, is that they're lacking a very essential element to it, because there's entertainment that goes to it, and it's not just something that you can put down on words. Not only is there the whole like problem with translation and everything, and there's missing context and nuance with translation, but you're also missing that when you're telling a story to someone else, you enact characters. Like it becomes a performance. You're also focusing on the rhythm and the musicality of the language and what you're saying, which can't be translated on paper. But when you're telling that to someone else, and as they're learning part of your dreaming, like, or vice versa, like there's this theater that comes along with it. And going back to what I said with the privileged information, you could share your dreaming with other people, but like it was an earned thing. Like you didn't just tell them that. Like you had to trust them. Like this was basically you going up to someone and opening up like your family history. Like this is showing someone your fucking family photo album. Like this isn't something you just do to people on the street. Like they have to earn your trust and form this intimate relationship with you.
Yeah, and in some of the texts, especially the older texts, they would present the societal setup as a gerontocracy, where the eldest people are ruling the society, but that's not exactly correct. Because it doesn't matter what age you are, if you are not initiated, you cannot speak from authority on that. And the only way to get through the initiations is to get through the initiations. And that takes time. And that tends to make that group's age a little bit higher than what we would see in a lot of older cultures.
Yeah, and additionally, like being older, they would have more knowledge of the dreaming of the people that are around them, of their own geography. So like it was, in addition to the initiation, like there was also that they know more. So we're going to like trust what they're having to say, because with the song lines and all of the stories being not only just storytelling, but like it helps dictate their laws by giving them a moral standard and everything, and how they should interact with other things like this. They had knowledge of it. So by knowing all of these songs, by knowing these dreamings, like you had a degree in law, like you were perfectly suited to be a judge because you knew more about this. And so like there's the other fascinating things that I found was like a song line, like as I had mentioned, like if you had a particular one, like say the emu dreaming, it could stretch across the continent. And one thing that was mentioned in the book The Songlines by Bruce Chatwin was that certain song lines, it would have a particular melody that went through it, and it may not be the same language. And so like basically you would have a stop off point along your territory where like your territory would stop because the language would change and you couldn't carry on. And as you had said, Pythia, like if you were to step off, you'd be trespassing, because like it's not or like it's still part of your history, but like there's a different caretaker now. And so like that's theirs to do. But with it having a specific melody, and like this melody would reflect also like the geography of the place. So like if there were like long droning notes in the song, like that would be representative of like long swaths of plain. Or if there were like lots of up and down, like if the notes were going up and down in tone, like that could represent like your lots of changes in elevation. And so a person who did not speak the language of the dreaming, like if that songline continued across the continent, they could still understand, based on the melody, the geography of the place as it unfolded across the continent. So someone who had never been to this place before could know what the geography looked like and the things around it just based on the song itself.
Yeah, the song is a map. It reminded me a little bit of the song Route 66, but if you added the actual landscape to it.
Okay, yeah.
So that song's all the stops along, all the cities and stops along the road. Yeah, just start adding the plants and stuff, and that's essentially what you got.
Mm-hmm. Which I found that like endlessly fascinating. And other aspects that I had learned through like previous research years ago was that through this being through this oral tradition being passed along through generations, and it being so kept secretly, and it being only passed down as certain landmarks in your life or certain like goalposts were reached, there was this element of keeping it intact because it was passed on, and it had this sacred aspect to it. For the most part, like these things were kept intact for a very long time, and there were certain instances of dreamings where like the memory of that song would go back thousands of years, where someone would recall in a dreaming how they had crossed over this area that didn't have water, and the last time that area did not have water was a few thousand years ago.
Yeah, the Torres Strait, 12,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm. And this was remembered and recorded in oral history, and it's a testament to how things were passed on throughout human civilization. And I don't remember her name, but there's a particular researcher who is studying the how this was something that existed like prior to writing in European societies, and how we remembered things the exact same way. It was passed down through oral history.
And that's something that is really fascinating about Australia. There is archaeological evidence of some kind of human there 100,000 years ago. They're not exactly sure who, but it seems to predate all of the timelines that we know. For civilization, well, not civilization, but culture and stuff like that, what is it, about 30,000 years ago we start seeing that?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, and that's the time frame we're looking at here for this culture, is about 30,000 years ago, and people within that culture today can still look at those representations and give you a slight rundown of what they mean. They still understand them to some degree.
Absolutely. And I find this absolutely fascinating that the people are so entwined with their land. There was a story that I read of these Aboriginal people who were riding in the back of a truck, and they were all singing very, very quickly, and the person who was driving them was a white person, and they were asking what they were doing. And like, we're singing our songline, we're just traveling through it really quickly.
Was that in the Chatwin book? I would say that was part of the Chatwin book. If you haven't read Bruce Chatwin, I do recommend it. He used to be, was he an anthropologist or was he just a traveler?
He was a journalist. And he has some interesting observational writings, especially in the songlines. Yeah, it's kind of like a sort of gonzo approach to it, where like he's just in there and he's describing like his experiences and everything. He gives these people a voice, and he speaks as they do. Like he keeps it like pretty verbatim, and like it gives a lot of character not only to the people around him, but like the situations he's involved in. Although I will say that with that book, like sometimes like it veered off into places that I really didn't give a shit about.
Yeah.
Like there was that bit with him talking to some person about like Russian history, and it's like, that's not why I'm reading this book, my dude.
Yeah, the Russian.
Mm-hmm.
I think he was trying to frame how the difference between an immigrant and a settler, but he wasn't quite nailing it on the head.
Yeah, that was just my one complaint about that book. It was just like, if I'm trying to gather information and wanting to learn more about this, like there are some things that I have to just stick through in order to learn more about it. But yeah, so that's essentially like a very cursory, very broad explanation of what the dreaming is.
Now, the dreaming, the dream time is present at all times, and that's understood. One of the things that the dreaming does is it allots duties equally to all of the things within it. So the people in their totems, they're not always equal and balanced in number, but then it becomes the human aspect's duty to rebalance those numbers. And in doing that, it's an ecological system. It's an ecological religion almost, where the humans, our duty is to sing the songlines and keep the balance. We're supposed to keep things the same, not better, not worse. We're not supposed to necessarily clean up a mess in the wilderness, and wilderness is the wrong word, but to keep it the same and keep everything moving along. And that's where our duties stand from the dreaming. If a country was to lose its people, and the country is just the land, they refer to it as country, the country. If a population died off that was managing that, it is then the neighboring group's responsibility from the dreaming to repopulate that land, but with respect to the dreaming that land already had. So they have to tread lightly and carefully to make sure that they're in balance with the ancestors that are already there, which I found fascinating, which means you can't just move in.
Right.
You have to know everything about it and then repopulate it.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, and that goes back like how I'd mentioned, like there weren't any land disputes because they saw themselves as like, not caretakers isn't the right word, but there was an act of caretaking. But as is with everything in this kind of paradigmal philosophy, everything acts as a web, everything is intertwined. And so the repopulating the land and giving that land respect, it's everything that happens as part of that land was also became part of that dreaming too. And so like when new things would show up, or like in the example you gave of of the land losing a population or whatever, like it became part of the song, it became part of the story, and everything that exists is like given words in order to exist. And so like when European settlers came over, like they weren't super impressed, partially because of that. They just saw it as part of the dreaming. Like this was an aspect that this was going to happen because this is what the land does.
Yeah, and in doing all that, in our responsibilities to that, and you also know the responsibilities of your totem. So being an ecologically informed system, the first thing you're ever going to learn is your totem's dreaming and everything about that. So as a child, you will learn your people's dreaming, which would be the Seven Sisters stories, which is one of the public stories that we're all allowed to know. And then you would know, if you were born to the honey ants, the sugar ants, you would then know everything about them. And once you know everything about them, you move into their affiliated groups. And it's ecological. It is every interaction between maybe is it called a goanna?
I don't recall.
Oh, that big lizard. I want to grab one so bad. They're so cool. Just want to bear hug a 6-foot lizard. But you would then know the interactions between them, and then you could step into the lizard's dreaming information and learn more about him, and you would learn slowly through all of that until you knew everything around you. And I think that's just fucking beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I know you had done a little bit more research than I did on like the agriculture.
Oh, yes. Oh, do you want me to get real rude?
Go nuts.
Let's talk about a word that's been flying around in horticulture, agriculture for a few years now. It's called permaculture. Permaculture is not okay. Permanent agriculture, I would prefer to use that term, but for brevity, we will say permaculture. Permaculture is theoretically based on the Australian Indigenous land practices. And it came out of Australia, and it was whitewashed. And it was whitewashed to become food production for homesteaders, which isn't really how it works. Now, the Indigenous framework was to know the ecologies of those plants so that you know when to find them, you know when they're good to eat, you know when the next cycle of the next species you need to look for will be starting. That's how it actually worked in the Indigenous system. What we turned it into is planting these 5 plants right next to each other, no matter what spot you were in, and we've applied it to every continent on the planet except for Antarctica, which is extremely disrespectful to the location and extremely disrespectful to the people who created these systems of knowing. When you read The Biggest Estate on Earth, which is about the land practices, one of the things that you will learn is they had very intricate systems for making sure no one went hungry. Sometimes there was famine, but it was very rare because they knew the ecology around them. And how they did that was that they did manage these populations, and slowly through time, they domesticated crops. But they're not domesticated like a dog, they're domesticated like a cat. And if you look at it like that, it makes way more sense. When they would see the white settlers coming in and gardening, they found it very disrespectful to the dreaming of those plants, especially if it was plants that they had always grown. They felt it was imprisonment to them. On top of that, they moved with the seasons. Like, we eat wheat year round, right? It stores up, and that's why we use it. But they wouldn't necessarily store all that stuff. They would eat it, and then they would move on to the next thing that's going to be around. And in doing that, their bodies became in tune with the cycles. You could say they were always in tune with the cycles, but it was tuned to the cycles of the plants around them. Now we have the Western agricultural system taking away their knowledge and then feeding them sugar and highly processed food, because that's what ships back out into Alice Springs. And now they have health problems. And that's something that I think more people should look more closely at. We're always saying this plant controls diabetes. Well, that's not exactly right. If you were to eat it, you're not going to cure your diabetes. But if you were to live the lifestyle of the people who told you that that solved diabetes, you might solve your diabetes. I could go on forever ranting about this shit. Permaculture is not really a thing. It's something that people are selling to you to get you to buy their books or to get you to buy their coursework. Any intricate system that they say that you can learn in a weekend workshop, they're lying. And if you walk out of that weekend workshop with a certificate to turn around and teach it, you are in a multi-level marketing scheme. That's just full stop. That's all that is. But yeah, the plants have a dreaming. The plants, the way they smell, tell you something. So certain plants only smell like certain things when certain weather conditions are happening, that you might not have the subtle ability to feel those changes in the air, but the plant told you, because the plant made that stink. When the plant makes that stink, the flies do this. When the flies do this, the birds do this. And that's how the actual permanent agriculture systems really work, is that it's all these things together bouncing off of each other to make the system come alive.
Yeah, on the permaculture thing, I remember I had seen this one discussion that I had sent you the video for, and it was a talk by the Aboriginal elder Wurrunga Dungir.
Oh, I love that one. Yeah,
where like his definition of permaculture was like, yeah, like permaculture now is just planting all of these things like you had described, but like back before colonization, all permaculture was like, I ate this plant and I spit out the seeds and just continued on, and it would grow. Yeah, and the places where those seeds happily grow when they're spit out is where they're supposed to grow. That's kind of how the biology works. If you spit the seed out where it's not supposed to grow, it doesn't start growing. And so when you're thinking about what you're growing in your garden, if you can't just drop the seed there, maybe it's not a good thing to grow there.
I'm not going to tell you not to grow tomatoes, but I'm going to say they're trouble for a reason.
Well, I mean, Australia also has a history of fucking the ecology of things.
Modern Australia. Sorry.
Well, yeah. Yeah, modern Australia. White people have the tendency to fuck the ecology of Australia. They brought in rabbits, which were non-native, and that just fucking ate everything. They fucking brought in cane toads to fight this bug, but then the cane toads like, well, we only ate that bug in the other place because there wasn't all of this other shit we could eat. Yeah. And so they ate everything else, and the cane toads became a problem. They have a problem with domestic cats too, where last I checked, Queensland still has a fucking bounty on domestic cats. And it all stems back to this Victorian mindset when they came in and saw Australia, and they're like, no, this habitat is all fucked up and wrong. You have these ducks with fur, and they lactate. That's wrong. That shouldn't happen. And then you have black swans. Shouldn't happen. You have these giant 2-footed deer with pouches. This shouldn't have. We need European things. That'll make everything right again.
Oh, nothing's worse than watching gardening shows, and then they go to Australia and they've got hedgerows made out of things that shouldn't even be in the US, let alone Australia. Ugh. Let's make it all nice, tidy rows with lawns in the desert.
Mm-hmm. But and finally, like, the one last thing that I would like to bring up about how, like, entwined these people were with their land. There's a particular tribe, and this wasn't representative of all Aboriginal tribes, but there was one tribe, the Pormpurawan. Mm-hmm. Their language actually reflects the cardinal directions, and so if you were standing facing north, you wouldn't have a left and right. Like, you wouldn't have a left hand and a right hand. You would have a west hand and an east hand. And if you turn south, that would reverse. And how they perceive time through their language is from east to west. And so the past is in the east and the future is in the west. It's so ingrained into them that you could even put them into, like, a room underground with no natural sunlight and leave them there for a while, and they would still know exactly what direction is what. This is so much a part of their language and a part of how they interact with the land around them that the directions of the earth itself inform them as to where they are standing.
Yeah, you could drive them out to nowhere and they'd probably get back.
But yeah, I think that kind of wraps it up with what the Dreamtime was. Did you have anything to say about the religious aspects? Because I know you remembered that a bit better than I did.
Nothing as like, hey, Emu's story did this. Well, actually, yeah, let's talk about that. Emu. So Emu's a narcissist a little bit. He's a wily guy. He is the trickster of their group of ancestors. The stories, he's a big feature of the childhood stories. What they have built into those stories are how to handle those character types when you see them in real life. So when your friends are acting wily, there are stories that give you the instructions on how to handle that situation, which I found really fun because, you know, we get exposed to books like If You Give a Mouse a Cookie, and we're supposed to figure out that's about communism somehow without being told. But when the emu stories are told, it's easy to see because you'll see the behavior and you'll know straight up, oh, this is how me from my clan, the Echidna, are supposed to act and interject for emu when emu's doing his shit. And I don't want to call it a pantheon. The ancestors, they're imperfect, but they are themselves, and they are displayed in the species. So a lot of the species behavior is part of the story, and they build their interactions around this. So if you are Echidna, you're supposed to act like echidna in some ways. You're supposed to carry on those traits. We kind of do this with the zodiac a little bit in the modern era, which isn't quite correct. But yeah, the mythology informs how you are supposed to act in real life in a very direct way, which I like, because when you're studying stuff like the Norse pantheon, yeah, it's in there, but the actions don't quite line up on what you're supposed to do next. Like, what the fuck are you supposed to do when Loki ties a goat to his balls? We don't really encounter that situation. But in theirs, these are real life situations, and how to interject and how to behave and get back into balance, which is ultimately their goal.
On that note, I think getting into the next kind of bit segment thing, like what could you pull from this practice, from this paradigm, that you can incorporate into your own practice, into your own understanding of administrism? And personally, I think just being able to like walk across my land, walk where I'm going, and being able to recognize what I'm seeing, being able to recognize where everything is, having an eye out. I wouldn't say like I'm going to write an entire song about it, but like I could write about it. Like we had mentioned this in the Drews episode, like creating your own like hymnal, your own spicy book of shadows in order to like praise what you're doing. Like write about it to the point where like you begin to know things intimately. We had mentioned this going back to one of the other episodes where everything has a name, right? Like you're able to walk wherever you want and be able to name a name. But I think like it's important to be able to know your land well enough to be able to point anything out. And this is one other thing that I had read, was knowing your land so well, and when there's a slight variation in things, you would kind of mention this with the agriculture and everything, like being able to recognize when and where things are in season, but knowing the land well enough that it's like, okay, well this, like the water's a little bit low, I know exactly what that means, or like this rock is out of place, so there's like something's moved this, and I can recognize where the thing has traveled. And I think that it's important to become so much a part of your land and your surroundings and everything, to be able to be present. I think it's important to become like so ingrained in like the understanding of your land that, and taking care of it, so that it's a reflection of yourself as well, as we had brought up. If you have an invasive plant that's spreading in your fucking yard like I do right now with the fucking thistles, like you take care of it because it's a reflection of yourself. The land is taking care of you. You have to take care of it. And I think that's a super important thing to bring into your practice, and knowing it intimately. So like I have a friend, for example, who like I have gone walking around with her, and she has 100 acres of woods that she has, but like walking around in the pitch dark of night, she doesn't need to see. She knows where everything is. We could be walking along, I can't see fucking dick, and she'll stop because I hear her stop, and she'll say, this is where my elderberry bush is. Like that's how well she knows her land. And I think it's important to be able to spend, not just write hymns about it, but like worship of something and incorporating that thing into yourself also means just mundane things, not just singing praises, but upkeep too.
Yeah. One of the takeaways that I got from this is in their worldview, everything has a dreaming, correct?
Yeah.
Everything. That means you have a dreaming settler person. You are responsible for your dreaming and your songs. You may have lost them because no matter where you come from, the Roman Empire made sure a lot of you don't have connection with that anymore. And in there, you have a responsibility to find those things again. So I'll tell you a few hints on how to find what yours might have been. Yara, yours, I tried looking up your family name. Unfortunately, it means teacher, and that doesn't work.
Shit.
But yeah, fuck. So, but I have this reflected in my family names. The national symbols, that is a part of your dreaming. So if America's the bald eagle, you are tangentially or in some ways affiliated with that animal. That animal is now a part of you. For me, it's a tree and a particular bird that comprises my family lines. So the dreamings are not completely lost, and you have a responsibility as a human in the dreaming to go back and find that for yourself. Maybe it's, your national symbols. Maybe it is something hidden in your family. Maybe it's something that found you that you just can't let go of. And I don't just mean your favorite animal in general. Something that has obsessed you a little bit that maybe shouldn't have, like that goddamn squirrel on your roof.
Oh, God, I fucking hate
That's now you're dreaming, Yara. Yara, you are squirrel. But
I fucking hate those bastards.
Me too. Oh, shit. But to go
You
back,
also have a hate boner against deer, so...
I do have a hate boner against deer. I never thought I would say that. This is something that you need to come to terms with, is especially in our culture, is that you have been stripped of all of this. But it's not gone. It's still there. And I don't mean go and find your spirit animal. That's not what you're doing. You're finding your responsibilities to the things around you. And that's what you should be doing. That goes to your land practice. You know your land. You need to be responsible to the things around you. And yeah, it's going to start with something like, hey, your first totem will be some dorky little animal that is just there for you and just around. And just go and learn everything about that as much as you can. Read the whole damn Wikipedia article and the references on it. Get a good idea of something. At least then you are in some way responsible for the knowledge of that. And I've done this with plants many times. Almost every single one of the goddamn seeds I grow, I sit there and read constantly on how to make sure that that seed germinates. So yeah, you've got to find your dreaming. You got to find where you fit in this world. Otherwise, the Roman Empire is just going to keep you. And that's not going too good for us right now.
Nope. And I will fully hold it to you that you need to go fucking hate fucking deer.
I do have a BB gun, and we have fired off shots at them. Only because they got close to the dog. They got a little too curious about the dog.
Yeah, we've had coyotes that have like gotten a lot more adventurous, and I'm pretty sure we've heard a pack of them start wandering into our yard.
Oh, those are always fun. No chickens for you.
No, and our dog is like he'll hear them outside and just want to go out. I'm like, no, dude, you're not. You will get torn to shreds. No. But on that note, let's talk about what we can do around the house, around the homestead, whatever you want to call it.
What you been up
your
to?
own caretaking. So the one I wanted to talk about today, there was this thing I had read recently where they were talking about in the history of the human race, like certain inventions or discoveries tend to be brought up more often than others, like the discovery of fire or the invention of the wheel, which great, but not necessarily all that important. Like fire, yeah, fire was good, but the wheel, you had the entire Incan Empire who never fucking used the wheel on a mass scale, so that was overrated. But one thing that's often overlooked is string.
Oh, shit, yeah. Strings.
Strings are fucking super important. not only can they like thread a bow, you can also use them to make clothes. You can use string to hold shit down. String is super fucking important. String holds things to you. String can like keep things away. Like it can bring you food through nets. Like string is fucking great. So there are lots of different ways to make string. So some of the ways the two ways I'm going to talk about to make string are through tree bark and through bast fiber. So bast fiber is the fiber that comes from fibrous plants. So the one that I have growing that I really need to get fucking rid of because I have too fucking much of it is thistle. It has bast. This is super useful in making string or cord or rope. So when it's towards the end of its life, after it's grown, it's about to die, while it's still kind of pliable, you start pulling that bast out, and then after you've got enough of it, you want to cord it generally, or card it. You want to card it. So you would usually use like a spiky thing, like generally now, like you can use, if you want to stick with plants or whatever in order to do carding, if you don't want to go out and buy a carding paddle, you can use teasels, which grow in North America. If you're in North America, you can use teasels. Those will do a decent job at carding, but what carding is basically to get all the threads in a straight line, all the bast fibers in a straight line. And then all you do is just start taking it between your fingers and twisting. And then twist it, and then as you get to the end, you add more fiber and start twisting and just keep doing that, and you'll eventually end up with a decent thread or decent string. And from that decent string, you can begin like taking it through through more spinning in order to make thicker string, like yarn or something, in order to make clothes. But if you want cordage, so cordage would be like thicker, more like heavy duty shit that you would use for like stringing a bow or whatever. You would use like the inner bark of trees. Popular trees for finding inner cordage from the inner root bark would be like willow. Oak is another good one, but oak you generally want to wait until the end of the season in order to get the inner bark from, because at the beginning of the season it's not as easily obtained. Poplar, and you'll strip the bark from it. Poplar can be easy at the beginning of the season where it just kind of like peels straight off, and once you get all of this bark off, you would just soak it in water, and then by soaking it in water, it'll separate the inner bark from the outer bark. And you take the inner bark and you just shred it into long stretches. And then you just do the same thing. Like you just wind it into cords, and then from there you can braid it into thicker cordage however you want. This is one thing like that's often overlooked a lot in like popular culture too. Like creating cordage or rope or thread is extremely time consuming, and it didn't start becoming like more industrialized or mechanized until like 1600s sort of. Prior to that, it was mostly made by hand. And so like in popular culture, especially anything like showing like shit from the Middle Ages, if you have someone who's like bound up in ropes, they'll just cut the rope. They never fucking cut ropes. That shit took forever to do. Like, rope was valuable. You did not cut that. Like if you untied something, you untied it. You don't cut rope. But yeah, no, you can go out and search like different trees for making cordage in your area. The only one with like decent bast fiber that I can think of right now is the thistle.
Tila.
Depending upon your area. What was that?
Tila, the tree Tila. Also,
okay.
Flax. Flax is super easy to grow. I do recommend experimenting with a patch of flax in making cordage. You can just throw flax seeds on the ground, and then you got pretty blue flowers, and then you can make rope.
Fuck yeah. But yeah, that's what I've got. Like, make some rope. Like, and like this can, it's because of how long like it takes and like kind of time intensive it is. Like, it can be a ritualized thing. Like you're growing it from your earth, and you're growing it from where you're at or finding it from where you're at. And then you can use this as a time to kind of like commune with that plant and commune with the land while you're sitting there and making the cordage or rope or thread or string. You just sit there and like observe everything around you, listen to what's happening. It's a very meditative, communal thing.
Yes, and the Australians were very good at making string. That is one of the things that their skill set that was, it wasn't matched as far as string makers go for most of the time that it was around. It's still done, and a lot of their amazing ritual pieces and their stuff that carries, well, everything carries some significance. That is done to such a good degree that it's in museums. It's fantastic work that they've done making string baskets, whereas a lot of other basket weavers will not do string, but they'll use the whole plant. They actually produce the parts from beginning to end. For my segment, my plant set of the episode, we're going to talk about cactus, Cactaceae. This is a very weird group. What do you think of when I say cactus?
I think southwestern United States and things that either I really should, or really should not put in my mouth.
They are mostly American. There is a species that got across Africa and all the way to Sri Lanka by birds. This group of plants is only about 25 million years old, so it's a very recent development as far as the evolution of plants go. These plants, you know them as the spiny round things. That is not what they are. The Cactaceae are mostly the flower structures. When you're talking about plant families, you're talking about the flower structures because that's the least likely thing to change moving from environment to environment. So these plants grow mostly in the desert because they have spines. All of them have spines. They are distinguished, much like how we are mammals, and that refers to mammaries, but we also define mammals as hair. The spines are a modification on the stem called areoles, and that does dictate if something is a cactus after the flower is determined to be a cactus. Now, these areoles, almost all of them have spines. Some of them have little fuzzy spots. Do not touch the fuzzy spots. Those are still spines. These plants grow mostly in harsh environments, but there are tropical ones. There are cactus with leaves that grow in the islands between Florida and South America. Most people don't think of them as having leaves. I want to grow one of these, but I'm not quite sure how to do it yet because they're trees. The cactus gives us a lot of gifts, the most obvious being fruit and food. And we eat the fruits off of cactus. Almost all cactus are edible fruits. If you can find the opuntia and knock the spines off of it, that's the paddle cactus. That is definitely a staple food of the Southwest. And beyond what it does for us, the ones that have big white flowers are almost keystone species of their environments. They are pollinated by bats, and bats do more pollination than you would think in the desert. In fact, most plants have a bat interaction, which is very interesting, which means they're going to be night blooming for the most part, white flowers, so they pick up that moonlight. And some of them have big radial petals that make echolocation possible if the bat doesn't see the whiteness first. On top of that, for our spiritual practices, we have very obviously mescaline, which this isn't a party drug.
No.
This is a get right with the universe for a whole weekend drug. I do not recommend this approaching a cactus casually under any circumstances. They have taught me this many times in my own house. Same with the using it for spiritual practices. You are not to casually approach the cactus for spiritual practice. The ones that are called peyote, those have an interesting life cycle. They are a shade-dwelling desert plant, which most people don't think about that. We think about desert plants as being out in the open, fully exposed. These do not do that. And it's very interesting. That means that their ecology is very delicate. They need plants to hide under. They have a relationship to all the bigger plants in the area. And if you go and plow out their area to build a shopping mall, you're killing all those cactus too. They can't come back. They need to be under these long-living protective species. On top of that, when you bring them into your house, and this goes for any cactus, this one's going to work as a ward. This one is a protector. It's, if I was to put it in the Goetics or the Key of Solomon, it would be closer to Stolas than it is to Oribus. So, or you know how in that group of demons, you can almost get anything you want out of any of them. I know they have skill sets that they give you. Those skill sets are just what they're really good at. They can do anything. And that's what they don't really tell you in the text is you can summon one of the nice demons, the dumb demons, the goofy demons, and get the same job done. When you go for the more advanced demons, the ones with claws, horns, beaks, you're dealing with something that fights back. That is the same thing with cactus. Yes, you can work with it, but if you don't approach it completely consciously, it will fight you back. And I have to pull spines out of my hands all the fucking time. My entire plant room is just covered in arboreal cactus and ground-dwelling cactus. That's another thing. Arboreal cactus, yes, they do live in trees. And if you don't keep your head on straight while working with cactus in any way, shape, or form, they will remind you to do so. So approach this group with respect. Approach it with love. I do recommend growing it from seed. It's one of the most fulfilling groups of plants that you can grow from seed, except for the orchids, which none of us are set up for that. But yes, cactus. Give it a shot. Get a little one.
On top of the peyote, which you mentioned, another cactus which does contain a decent amount of peyote or mescaline, which is used, is San Pedro.
San Pedro does really well under house conditions. I have 4 different species of that group. And yes, I do have a San Pedro cactus, the one specific species. But I'm not going to use it for that. He's too baby.
Yeah, and because like it compared to peyote, it has significantly less mescaline in it, and so you have to cook a lot of San Pedro in order to get it, because it contains mescaline for anywhere from 0.053 up to 4.7% of dry cactus weight.
Yeah, and when you consume such things, realize it fights back. You are going to be vomiting. It is closer to the ayahuasca journey than the DMT journey. So you're going to be struggling with that one for a little bit until you get your bearings, but approach them with respect. The San Pedros, when you do these things, know that they need lots of light. You're not doing this like you do an aroid. You are supplementing their light if you live in the north. You are bringing them in the house if you live in the Central Plains, because some of them cannot tolerate cold at all. Some of them can, because they grow all the way up to Alberta in some species of cactus.
Also, it gets really fucking cold in the desert.
It does. But a damp cold or a polar vortex bubble could fuck it up real good. I lost an 8-foot San Pedro to that.
Fuck.
Yeah, that was a $500 cactus by the time it hit that size. But San Pedros are easy to grow, so if you get a cutting, they root very readily. Remember that you are not to let them sit in water. I water once a week. I sub-water, which is to pour the water into the tray and give it no more than what the tray will hold. What else about these little guys? If you buy the timeline for effective use of a cactus for a ward, you're looking at 2 years before that thing knows how to do it. It takes some time. It can jump out swinging, but it's going to swing at you too. So take your time with these for sure.
I actually have a cactus right next to me, and I have no idea what the fuck it is.
Send me a photo, maybe I'll be able to figure it out.
I will. Well, I like it's made even worse because like we had bought it. It was on sale at some fucking store. I don't remember what fucking store, but they had decided to like gussy it up by gluing a fucking rubber flower on it.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of that or the grafted cactus.
Yeah, so I don't want to rip the thing off because I guarantee it'll damage it, and so I'm just leaving it on. But yeah, that I think that wraps up this episode. So the next one that we're going to be doing, we already settled on it, was the Kong. We're both awful at this. I can't speak it. Kong. Yeah. Exclamation point, which is an alveolar click. Kung. Kong. I think, yeah. Maybe we're gonna fuck this one up.
That was my choice.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. It's fine. Like, and they have like, if I remember correctly, they have 3 other kinds of clicks. They have the dental click, which is, they have the lateral click, which is, and then they have the, what was the other one? The palatal click, which is,
yeah. Now
Oh.
say it in a sentence.
Nope, can't do it. Nope, I won't be able to do it. But yeah, so we're going to be going over the Kung culture, and that will be fun, and I look forward to it. But in the meantime, thank you for listening, and if you want to come hang out with us, you can join us on our Discord server, which you just really have to Google Administrism Discord server and we'll show up. We also have some socials, but I'm terrible at keeping up with those, so like don't expect too much. But yeah.
Yep.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks.
Shit.